Thank you. Wonderful. Great to see all of you. Thank you for joining us. I know we've got people from all over the country on this phone call, and wonderful to have Ambassador Michael Oren with us, who has served as Israel's ambassador to the United States from 2009 to 2013. He also served in the Israeli Defense Forces as a paratrooper and participated in the wars and was at the level of a major. So he is really akin to what it's like to be at war. Really, through Michael's life, he has been a prominent figure in the Israeli-American collaboration and making real contributions both in academia and in public service. And Michael, thank you for your sacrificial effort on behalf of the United States as well as Israel. And, we're standing at a critical time. You've got a group of people on this phone call who are have loud voices and who are civic leaders, who are leaders in business and care very much about what's going on in the Middle East. And as Israel is a nation living under a constant existential threat, people don't realize that until we get to wartime like this. And of course, this war like no other. So we are upright, we are listening, we are horrified about what has taken place. It just seems that Israel has always had that keen ability to define reality accurately as it concerns the Middle East. And while this breach in security, while this took place, it's been difficult to watch that take place. They've always been able to climb to the highest vantage point and see what nobody else can see, to see the danger, to understand the Iranian hegemony in the region and proxies surrounded by them on multiple fronts, and kind of like a chess master. They've been able to see the board and understand the moves and the configurations and the hundreds of ways that you can move this piece and that piece and the impact that it's going to have.
Oh, yes.
And they've been able to turn back to the Western world and to make that battle cry, please hear what we're saying. They sounded the alarm for a decade on Iranian aggression in the region, and also the need to not appease. Well, here we are in a war that is affecting the United States of America, and we're watching this in horror. And I wanted just to ask you a couple of questions. When you were deputy minister in the prime minister's office, you were tasked with improving the living conditions of Gaza. And so as we're watching on our television every single day, this bombardment of Gaza, we want to be enlightened further. The practices of Hamas and how they've kept the Palestinians in a headlock who live there. They've indoctrinated an entire generation to an anti-Jewish, rather barbaric ideology. They've used the Palestinians as human shields, and then when it's convenient, they kill them in order to, in the pursuit to have Israel indicted for war crimes. Well, it's not hard to see that the Israelis are valuing Palestinian lives more than the Hamas do. And as Israel now expands their ground invasion to weed out the political and military leadership, we've had the Palestinian Red Crescent Society be clear that they're not going to evacuate the hospitals. We know that the largest Hamas command center is underneath Shifa, the hospital, the large hospital in Gaza. How in the world are the IDF going to be able to take out the Hamas headquarters, the military leaders, the installations, and also hopefully bring back the hostages?
Heather, first of all, it's always a pleasure and it's always an honor to be with you. In addition to our personal friendship, I deeply appreciate your immense commitment to Israel and to the historic alliance between Israel and the United States of America. So thank you, and thank you all for being here with me this afternoon into the fourth week of this war. I'm talking to you from South Tel Aviv, from Jaffa, and we've been targeted pretty much nightly, so we may be interrupted by incoming rockets. It's very common here. We're holding out. We're tough people. I dealt with Gaza in one way or another for much of my professional life, whether as an historian, as a statesman, and as a soldier. As Heather mentioned, I've fought in Gaza before. It's not a place where any infantryman wants to be. It is the worst possible battleground, because not only is it this warren of alleys and rubble and piles of garbage and dust, but all of which is booby trapped and mined extensively, but and enfiladed. But the major battlefield is not above ground; it's below ground, where Hamas has dug several hundred miles of tunnels and bunkers, some of them hundreds of feet beneath the surface of the actual of the city of Gaza. So you talk about fighting. You know, the Iranians are great at playing triple tier chess. The Hamas definitely is a two-dimensional game. You're fighting above ground and below ground. It's very, very difficult. You know, the historian in me would like to take an hour and tell you about the history of Gaza. It's fascinating. There were ancient Jewish communities there. Of course, the Philistines were there. If you read your Bible, don't shout it in the streets of Gaza. Less known is that it was always a breadbasket, very fertile area. The word gauze in English comes from Gaza because of the great textile made there. And when Israeli settlements were there, we had 21 settlements. They produced all the organic vegetables in the state of Israel. So this is a very fertile area. It's not desert. That's a misconception. And southern Gaza is all agricultural. Yes, the northern part is very densely populated. The southern part's always empty. And just to refresh, you know, in 2005, in an extraordinarily painful operation, Israel ripped up those 21 settlements, evicted 9,000 Israeli Jews from their homes. I was in that operation. It was more traumatic than anything I went through in any war. And we did it to give the Palestinians a chance at statehood. It was an experiment. They had a mini state. But that mini-state was quickly taken over by Hamas. Hamas executed, by the way, hundreds of Palestinians who were in favor of a peace process. People forget that. You know, there's this common notion that this war has broken out because of frustration of the Palestinians in Gaza, because there was no progress toward a two-state solution. It's completely the opposite. What would make Hamas even angry, if you can imagine that, was if there were progress to a two-state solution. Every time we get progress is when the Hamas bombers came out, because they hate peace. They hate peace, and they kill Palestinians as well as Israelis. So people forget there's a lot of misconceptions out there. It is true. Starting after the Hamas takeover in 2007, we had these constant sort of cyclical wars. 2008, 2009. I was in that war as a reserve officer. 2012, I was already in Washington, but 2014. 2021, and then a small battle with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another Palestinian terrorist organization in Gaza. There are several. The two biggest ones are Hamas and PIJ. And they were pretty much, you know, they fell into a pattern. The pattern was the Hamas or PIJ would fire rockets at us. Hamas together they have about 15,000 rockets. And starting in 2012, with the great help of the United States of America, and particularly the Congress, we had the Iron Dome system. I always said, in addition to the Iron Dome, we got a marble dome over us, the Dome of Congress, and that went from 80% effective to over 90% effective, and that changed the balance. But you know, it created also different problems. It created what I call the D word, disproportionality. Fewer Israelis were getting killed, and more Palestinians being killed by our counterstrikes in Gaza. So we're being condemned for war crimes in the world, and that sort of played to Hamas's playbook. That they knew they couldn't destroy us with the rockets, but they could destroy us by delegitimizing us, getting us boycotted and sanctioned as war criminals. It was very, very, very intelligent. In every war, they eroded our legitimacy even more. The Israeli public was getting fed up, but the Israeli government had a different perspective. And here, starting in 2016 to roughly 2018, I was a deputy minister in the prime minister's office, a member of Knesset, and one day the prime minister called me in and said, "I got some bad news for you. We're going to put you in charge of Gaza." And I went into a crash course about Gaza. All I had known as a historian and as a soldier in Gaza, I realized I actually knew nothing. And I sat with the experts on Gaza, and this is what I learned. This place is a hellhole. It's a hellhole not just because of the refugee camps and the sewage, and it was a hellhole first of all because of Iran. And Iran was willing to fight Israel to the last Palestinian. It was a hellhole because of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, which was willing to fight Hamas to the last Israeli. And then there was Hamas itself. And Hamas itself cared not a feather for the Palestinian population. Hamas, this is not widely known, Hamas would use and lose hundreds of Palestinian children every year digging its tunnels. They didn't care. They didn't care. We have one major crossing into Gaza. It's known by the ill-conceived name of the Vineyard of Peace, Kerem Shalom. And that crossing was a major intersection, which had the capacity of 1,200 very large flatbed trucks every day. Those trucks brought in food, medicine, clothing, toys, whatever you wanted. The blockade, people would say, oh, Hamas was angry because of the blockade. It was starving the Palestinians out because of the blockade. The blockade was imposed only when Hamas took over. I mean, we used to go shopping in Gaza. You couldn't do that now with them. And the blockade was only about military materials and what was called dual use materials. And so if you brought in a length of water pipe into Gaza, the Hamas would use it for rockets. Mm-hmm. Everything was used for their tunnels. If you brought in a 2x4, it went into the tunnels. If you brought in wiring, it went into the tunnels. Everything was about the colossal effort to destroy us. But the Israeli government, and I must say the Israeli army and the Internal Security Service, the Shabak, and the Mossad had a preconceived notion called in Israel a concepcia. What was the concepcia? That Hamas wore two hats. It wore a terrorist hat. It was a jihadist group, just like ISIS or Hezbollah or Al Qaeda. It had the same theology, which is to create a Middle Eastern caliphate and then expand that caliphate to include the world. The only difference with Hamas was the first stage of that process would be our destruction of the state of Israel. And so there was a jihadist hat, but there was also a governance hat because, at the end of the day, Hamas was the de facto sovereign of a Palestinian mini state. So the notion was that we would incentivize Hamas to prefer the governance hat over the terrorist hat. And how are we going to do that? First of all, letting the Qataris come in and dump immense amount of money. And I can't say, I used to watch these armored cars go in with pallets of American bills on pallets, not bundles. And we would also let Palestinian workers come into Israel. It was a big risk. Let 20,000 Palestinian workers from Gaza come into Israel every single day. It was great for the Palestinians. They were in a very high salary by Gaza terms with social benefits. And basically easing up on Hamas. But we forgot who they are. And who they are is they're ISIS. And they don't care about the cash. They don't care about the workers. They care about killing us. They care about that vision of destroying us en route to creating that or recreating the medieval Islamic caliphate in the Middle East. And that is the immediate backdrop to the horrific events of October 7th. We have learned very, very much the hard way. Is Iran involved in this? Certainly. There are questions about whether we have, the smoking gun or not, but certainly have an immense amount of circumstantial evidence. We know that Hamas is trained and funded by Iran. Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as I said before, is totally owned and operated by Iran. And we know that Hamas and Iranian leaders met secretly only a few weeks before the war, and that Hamas fighters have been trained, 500 of them were trained in Iran in precisely this type of operation. So Iran is deeply involved in this. This is part of Iran's master plan to surround Israel on all sides with rockets, 150,000 in the hands of Hezbollah, maybe 15,000 in the hands of Hamas and PIJ, but also rockets in the hands of Shiite militias in Iraq and pro-Iranian Houthi rebels in Yemen. And they have actually fired rockets at us, as you know. So we're there. This war, and I cannot stress this enough to all listeners, please, if you take away anything from this conversation, take away this. They have now, at last count, we're still counting, by the way, close to, 240 hostages in their hand. The Hamas will release those hostages, maybe one at a time, or release videos of them. Now they've just released a video of 3 of these women. They are going to do this with high-profile cases that will come out and say, Hamas is wonderful. You guys got it all wrong. They don't, behead people. They don't burn people. They don't rape people. They don't dismember people. You got it all wrong. It's all disinformation. They treat us very well. And if Israel will agree to bringing fuel into the Gaza Strip, if Israel will agree to an open-ended ceasefire, we'll start letting these hostages go. Right? And this created a tremendous and mounting pressure on us to agree to a ceasefire. Here's my message to you. Take this away. A ceasefire means one thing and one
Yes.
thing only. It means the death of the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
It's an existential war, friends. It's a
Mm.
war for our survival, just not for our security. What does a ceasefire mean? Ceasefire means that Hamas literally gets away with mass murder. Period. And it means that we cannot restore the security of our own territory. We have 300,000 evacuees right now. They can't go back to their homes.
Mm.
I don't know if they'll even resettle in the South. South is 62% of the country. I don't know who's going back. I don't know. Heather, would you bring your kids down to live down there knowing
No,
that Hamas was unpunished? No, who
no.
would? No normal person would. No normal person would. If they get away with this, Israel will not, we will not be able to restore our deterrence power. And the message will go out to all of our enemies
Mm-hmm.
that we are completely vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And if we try to defend ourselves, the international community will prevent us from defending ourselves, so they can attack with impunity at will. That's what a ceasefire means.
Mm-hmm.
We have no choice but to strike back.
Mm-hmm.
How we strike back is another question. The initial, the impetus, and I think that was very much a gut reaction, was to call up 360,000 reservists. I'm very frustrated because I haven't been called already. I'm, a grandfather. 360,000 reservists, and get the sense. I think this is more reservists than the entire American military. It's certainly, together with our standing army, brings us up to the size of the force that went into Iraq in 2003, the coalition forces. Huge army. And at great cost, immense cost, because these 360,000 are, young people in their 30s, their 20s, who are the backbone of our economy. They're the backbone of our high-tech sector.
Mm-hmm.
And so, at almost prohibitive cost, and leaving their families, disruptive to the social fabric of the country. But everyone was prepared. Everyone was prepared to go in. They had, on the call up, they had something like 150% response to the call. People haven't been on the list for years showed up. And I actually dusted off one of my uniforms here in the vain hope that someone called me. I'd rather be doing that. I'm sorry, I'd rather be doing that than doing this, but okay. I'm probably more effective here than I was as a soldier. So, but I think the Army is adopting what they call the American model, which is the Army will proceed cautiously. It will use artillery and air power to clear a village or a neighborhood. It will take over that village and neighborhood, using it as a staging ground for the next round of fighting, and slowly close a corridor, close the noose, if you will, around Hamas and the hostage. Mm-hmm. It's going to be very difficult. As you heard, the Hamas headquarters is located under Shifa Hospital. It's also under other hospitals, under all schools, very deep underground. Those hostages are somewhere under there. We have special forces that are trained to go into tunnels. We have special forces that are trained to rescue hostages still. By the way, the most dangerous jobs in the Army. At the end of the day, my gut feeling tells me we're going to have a Beirut 1982 situation where, if you remember, the paratroopers went into Beirut. That was me. And Arafat, arranged a deal with the PLO, with the French, with the Americans, to evacuate Beirut for Tunisia. And I think the hostages will be used as a get-out-of-jail card by a lot of these terrorists. And they will keep. I think that I do a lot of interviewing on TV, and one of the questions I used to get was, don't you think that by entering Gaza now in a ground invasion, you are lessening the chance of rescuing the hostages? I think just the opposite is true. I think that they want to use these hostages as use their own population as human shields, but they're even better shields. If you can imagine that. They will try to. I think they'll try to keep these hostages in relatively good shape, those who are in fact alive, because they want to trade them off at the end. And a dead hostage is not worth that much to them. It's still worth something. We're still trying to get bodies back from Hamas, the 2 soldiers who were killed in 2014. But this is going to be a long and painful operation. I think that the way we're doing this in the American model perhaps lessens the chances of Hezbollah entering the war. Mm-hmm. And here I have to express great appreciation for President Biden's speeches, which have touched us all deeply, he and Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, but also by moving very large naval assets into the region. We're talking about 2 strike forces, to carry strike forces around the USS Ford and Eisenhower, but along with these aircraft carriers are frigates, destroyers, submarines, massive forces that are there to deter Hezbollah and Iran. Mm-hmm. Hezbollah keeps firing at us. young man from Rockville, Maryland, was killed last week by an anti-tank missile. I know his family well. And people are being killed, and many areas of the north have been evacuated. But so far, Hezbollah has not unleashed those 150,000 rockets.
Mm.
I should also say, parenthetically, that early in the war, I published an article in the Israeli press, and it's available in English on my Substack called Clarity. It's free; you can get it. It's my observations on the war, where I raised the possibility that maybe Israel should contain Hamas in the first stage, because Hamas is trapped, can't go anywhere, and we can continue hitting Hamas from every angle, but we should focus our military energies on Hezbollah.
Mm.
Hezbollah is 15 times the threat of Hamas.
Right.
It's got many more rockets, longer range, more accurate. Some of them are cruise missiles, guided missiles, for which we don't have very good defense. We have a wonderful system developed with the United States called David Sling, which can intercept a cruise missile, but it's very pricey. Every interceptor costs about $1 million. Do the math, and they have a terrorist force that has been massacring Syrians for the last 10 years. So they're well trained in savagery, and with now that we have these 360,000 reservists called up, and now that we have the carrier groups off the Lebanese coast, maybe this is the time to deal with Hezbollah, because no country can deal with a threat like that.
Mm.
Some of us are old enough. I don't know. I can't really see your faces to remember the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, when President Kennedy was willing to go to nuclear war to prevent the stationing of Russian missiles on Cuba. Can you imagine if they had 150,000 rockets, stationed along the Canadian border? What would you do?
Mm.
And stationed there by a force that is committed to your destruction, to doing exactly to the citizens of the North what Hamas did to the citizens of the South. Exactly the same thing. It's insufferable. Now, the question is whether Hezbollah will enter into the war. I don't know. There's a fear that Hezbollah will wait till we're bogged down in Gaza and tired and low on ammunition, and they'll unleash the 150,000. Or not. We don't know. Nobody knows. We have to be prepared for that. And a lot of our forces are deployed up north as well. But we certainly appreciate the presence of those aircraft carriers and the strike groups. Those are helping to deter Iran and Hezbollah. A long haul. Every interviewer, certainly every American station, has asked me about the day after. And I understand the administration has also been asking. And it's a legitimate question. It comes up with every round of fighting. What's our end game? But here, this time, the end game is not quiet for quiet. We're not going to pay off Hamas this time. We're going to uproot Hamas. We're going to destroy Hamas. We're going to do our best to rescue those hostages. At the end of the day, Israel will have to remain in Gaza for a prolonged period of time, because the uprooting process, the Hamassification of Gaza, is going to take a long time. We have to get down to all those tunnels. We got to get the hostages. It's not going to happen overnight. And we appreciate all of your support in that prolonged battle. Ultimately, though, I think what Israel will do will to demilitarize Gaza, to create a sort of no man's land around Gaza, no more access to our border for the Palestinians there. And I think Israel should do its utmost to internationalize Gaza, so it no longer be an Israeli problem. Because the fact is, it's not an Israeli problem. Hamas is involved, has now managed to drag the United States against the will. By the way, I don't think you'll disagree with me that one of the few issues that have bipartisan support in Washington is desire not to get involved in another Middle East war. I mean, American forces are engaged. They are engaged, whether it's shooting back at Iranian-backed militias or taking down missiles aiming for Israel from Yemen. America's engaged, and I think that so it's clearly not an Israeli problem. It's clearly not just an Egyptian problem. It is a regional problem. It's an international problem, and should be treated as such. And I would hope that some type of international force, perhaps an inter-Arab force, would take the keys from us, from Gaza. That international force will preside over the reconstruction of Gaza, to the building of infrastructure for desalination, water reclamation, electricity, infrastructure, jobs, everything that needs to restore Gaza to a peaceful entity, and also preside over the installation of a peaceful government. Questions will remain whether that government will include elements of the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian Authority, very corrupt and very unpopular among the Palestinians. I don't know if we want to take that corruption and unpopularity and put it in Gaza. But these are questions that are down the line. Right now, we have a job to do. And that job, I cannot stress this enough. This is not a border skirmish. This is not even a struggle for Israel's security. It's a struggle for our survival. And that is why it's being fought.
Yes.
Okay. Any
So
questions,
good.
please? A lot of
So
information.
good. It's so good. Michael, we really appreciate that. It was such an incredible, you took us on a little bit of history and really helping us to understand where Israel is and Israel, that Israel actually has to win this war. It's not like it is sort of arbitrary or we hope we will win. It has got to be a decisive victory. And it's concerning to us Americans as we're watching this, that we want to be able to see the United States, our government, our Congress, and our U.S. administration be able to really stay in there and not call for a ceasefire, which is the pressure of the world. And what do you think is going to happen? I mean, we want to see an unwavering support all the way to the end from the Biden administration, which we've enjoyed to this point in an incredible way. I mean, it's been a force of support from President Biden,
and with moral clarity.
With moral clarity.
That's not to be taken for granted.
No,
there's not a lot of moral clarity in the world.
Right, no. And it's very clear. And do you feel like that we're going to be able to sustain this? I mean, if it's a multi-month, 3-month war, people have short attention spans and they forget that Israelis were slaughtered so unmercifully.
They've forgotten already.
They're tired already.
European television, go on BBC and see what it's like.
Yes. Just comment on this. How is the United States going to stay in this really practically, tactically?
I'm not a representative of the Israeli government anymore, which is good news and bad.
Yeah.
Good news, I can say things that I probably wouldn't say if I was, still ambassador or still in the government. And that is this: the issue of a humanitarian corridor is politically a heavy lift here. I spent part of my days going around visiting the families of hostages, and they're very much opposed. They can be left wing, right wing. They're all opposed to the humanitarian corridors because they say, listen, we haven't. The Hamas won't even let the Red Cross visit our relatives. We have 30 children under there, Asian people, Holocaust survivors. We don't even know who's a hostage and who isn't. I visit families; they have no idea where their loved ones are. So why should we give water and food or any other supplies to the Palestinians when they won't even get the Red Cross in there? By opening the humanitarian corridors, we lose our leverage. A huge leverage.
That's really important.
No, it's huge. Think, what would you do? What would you if your children were 300 feet underground in some Hamas chamber? What would you want to give them? Water and food? You want to give Palestinians or lose that leverage? And yet the Biden administration has been very adamant about it, and the Israeli government has relented and made these humanitarian corridors. They haven't been functioning very well. And now the Secretary of State has actually gone further by saying we should have humanitarian pauses. And I question whether that's a blink. I'm not making a play on the name, but it's a blink. And we didn't have pauses before. That would be another erosion of our leverage. With these pauses, I don't know how else to say this. And so it's a difficult call. But I do think, and this is because I'm not a representative of the government, I think that the humanitarian causes ultimately are in our interest. For the very reason you're talking about, Heather, because we're coming into winter, and the images of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees out in the cold, out in the rain, without food, without supplies, will only intensify that international pressure on us for a ceasefire. And our interest right now, and I believe it's a common interest with the United States, is to give time and space for the Israeli forces to do what they have to do. It's going to be difficult enough to do without that international pressure.
We're going to have our Congress really work together in a bipartisan way to continue to keep that strength behind the White House and put a strong effort out of our government. It's going to take some real sustenance. Do you see the war being 2 months, 4 months, or 6 months?
6 plus.
6 months.
Maybe 6 months. 6 months. What is war? Maybe low intensity at some point.
Yeah.
It's going to go to a point where the surface of Gaza is clean, but we still have to deal with the tunnels.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't
Yep.
know. It could be
Sounds
prolonged.
like it's gonna be
We don't
long.
know about this. We don't know about the second front. We do not know about the second front.
Michael, I have Representative Susan Wild who's joined us and has
Hi,
a
Susan.
question for
Yes,
you.
please.
Of
course.
Would you please unmute Representative Wild?
Hello, how are you? Thanks
I'm
for.
good. Good to hear you.
I feel fortunate that I was invited on this. I see a couple of other reps, I guess.
Yes.
But anyway, my questions, which are in the chat, and some other people have questions, but it seems to me that the number of hostages keeps increasing, not exponentially, but a few every couple of days. And I'm just wondering what about that. And also my second question was whether it's true that the humanitarian aid trucks stop on the weekends because of Shabbat.
Okay, so this is not, first of all, it's not true about the Shabbat thing because they're not our aid trucks. We can't get our aid. Our crossing is closed. That vineyard of peace is closed.
Let me just clarify. What I've been told by some reputable sources is that they stop because of Shabbat because Israel needs to inspect the aid trucks. So even though they're not Israel's trucks, they're involved in inspecting them, and they stop because of Shabbat.
I don't know. I think it's a little bit of a, do you walk to school, you bring your lunch. We're going to inspect the trucks on every day of the week. Right. We have to, because in those trucks are ammunition, in that trucks are everything that Hamas needs, and we have to inspect. And so it's every day of the week. And I don't know whether they stop on Shabbat, but I don't think it would because the drivers, I don't think, are Jewish.
Yeah, but if the inspectors are, that's the issue. Are the inspectors?
Because the inspections. Okay, I don't know. I can be honest with you. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Right. But it's worth checking out, and I'll be happy to check it out for you. But our crossing was blown up by Hamas. Okay, and where they were killed. And the approaches to that crossing are under rocket fire. So you can't get an Israeli truck driver to drive there if they could. So that is a non-starter. You have to go to the Egyptian crossing.
And what about the hostage number?
Hostage numbers keep going up because we have well over 100 people still missing on the count. So I heard
the hostage number until they're confirmed to be hostages as opposed to just.
So what we're learning is that as they've released some hostages, they've seen people or pictures have been taken of them. It's not because families have been notified by the Red Cross. Okay. The hardest families I have to visit are families where they don't know what the loved ones are. You don't want to tell them this, but they're probably because there is between 100 and 200 bodies that can't be identified. Mm-hmm. Because they were so badly dismembered, mutilated, hurt, we can't identify them. And so those families, those loved ones are officially listed as missing and potentially hostages. Potentially. So what happened today was there was one just horrific picture, you may have seen it, of a young woman who was lying face down in a flatbed truck and was paraded through the streets of Gaza, and people spit at her and beat her. It turns out this is so gruesome. They found a piece of skull that matched the DNA. So they informed, she's a German Israeli, says they informed her parents today that she's no longer alive. So if it was indeed her on the flatbed truck, I don't know. The saving grace that she was no longer alive when she was paraded to the streets.
Unbelievable.
Now you were talking about, we're talking about a level of evil, and there's no other word for it. Mm-hmm. That it somehow manages to exceed that of ISIS. It's just, I don't know how.
It really is. Well, Michael, just one last question for you from Coach Bruce Pearl. Coach, are you still on? He's our Auburn basketball coach. You still on? All right.
Yeah,
I missed you.
I don't know, Ambassador Oren, thank you for the history lesson, and thank you for providing us with some information so that we have the ability to support Israel and defend her in her fight. I'm not sure, Heather, if you knew what my question was going to be, you would come to me right now. But I just remember in 1967, the Arab nations were talking loud. They weren't even as engaged as they are right now in attacking us, with Hezbollah's threat in the north always being there. I'm sure there's been discussions about just eliminating that threat first, preemptively, rather than waiting.
My position.
rather than waiting.
was my
That's my
position.
position also. Rather than waiting for them to fire on us, we got to move forward with this solution. And while all eyes are on Gaza, Gaza can't strike us so terribly right now. Why won't we take out Hezbollah and see what the rest of the world will do? Russia's busy. China isn't concerned about it as much. Let's see if Iran really does want to get in the fight. And there's no better time to do it than when the United States fleet is sitting right there.
That's right.
And we have the army mobilized, fully mobilized. Yes. And we're under fire from Hezbollah. It's not like they're sitting quietly. So the issue was, I raised this several weeks ago. Apparently, there are other people in the military and the defense establishment thought similarly, including the defense minister, Yoav Gallant. Again, I'm basing myself now on press reports that it went up for a discussion in the Israeli government, and the prime minister and several other ministers turned it down. They turned it down purportedly under pressure, also the pressure of the United States. The United States believed that these carrier groups would be involved in active combat. And it's possible because they have very advanced and multiple anti-missile technologies aboard. They have THAAD in Egypt and Patriot missile systems. And they would be taking down some of these 150,000 rockets fired at us. And they could also be vulnerable and targeted. So I guess the United States wanted us to focus on Gaza. There is a hope that by decisively defeating Hamas, we'll deter Hezbollah. In the end of the day, there's no real deterring these people. They have to be removed, and because deterrence doesn't work. We've tried deterrence, doesn't work.
Right.
And I have to proceed on the assumption, and everyone has to proceed on the assumption that Hezbollah built up this massive force not for show. Right? They build it up to use it because they are jihadists. They have this millennial vision of recreating the caliphate. There's a Shiite caliphate, okay, but same vision. And by the same methodology and the same savage. I spent, many years, I took in the army, and a good chunk of my time was spent in Lebanon. And I used to be in a fire base there. And opposite the fire base, I'm not making this up, was a huge Hezbollah poster, as big as a billboard you can get on any American highway. And it showed a Hezbollah soldier holding up the head of an Israeli soldier. The photograph, it wasn't a painting. And we had to watch that 24/7.
Unbelievable.
That's who we're dealing with.
Yeah, it sounds like that Iran is not ready to go to war yet. We might like to go to war with them, but they're not ready exactly putting their big foot in at this time. They're trying to draw us into a war with their proxies. Yep.
I talk about this Substack I have called Clarity, and I try to address issues with the utmost clarity. And one of my next essays is going to be the following. So you're going to get a preview of it. It's going to be this. Brace yourself. Maybe this is the time for American decision makers to say, listen, for 15 years, we've tried this pivot to Iran. It didn't work. Iran could not be incentivized to become a responsible regional power. Iran is destabilizing the entire Middle East and potentially dragging us into another war. Now is the time to deal with Iran. We have these forces there. America has the abilities to eliminate the Iranian nuclear program in a matter of hours. Iran has no air force, it has no tanks. You're not going to get involved in a war. Iran has no ability to get ability to get into a war with Iran. It can cause mischief. It can cause terror. It does that anyway. And it's admitting that you made a mistake. And believe me, I just admitted we made a mistake in thinking that we could somehow incentivize Hamas to be less, jihadist. We failed. America, by the way, made the same mistake.
Yes.
They made exactly the same mistake. Let's treat these guys nicely, respectfully, and give them a lot of money, and they'll change their behavior. It didn't work. It doesn't work here. And now is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for everybody. And I think it would send an unequivocal message to the Russians, to the Chinese. It would reverberate around the world. That's what I'm going to write. So check it out on Clarity.
Well, from your mouth to God's ears. And Michael, Ambassador, we so appreciate you being on with us. This was brilliant. And I do agree with you that leadership in the world today needs to be defining this reality accurately, as Winston Churchill did in his day, opposite his counterpart, who saw appeasement and peace in the rise of Nazi Germany. It is a time for courage. It's a time to say we admit our mistake. Our policy with Iran has not been right, and we need to pivot and go in a different direction. Thank you for being with us. We sure appreciate you.
And I thank you all for your support for us, for our people, our state, and our alliance through this very, very trying period. I can't,
Yes.
I don't speak for the state of Israel anymore, but I think I can.
You
So
can.
in the name of the state and people of Israel, we want to say to every one of you, thank you very much.
Yes.
Really.
Thank you, Michael. And we have got Ari Sasher, who's going to take 5 minutes. Michael, you jump off whenever you need to, but thank
Okay.
you for being
I gotta
with
go.
us. And
Off to battle.
yes, Ari Sasher, our wonder working
Bye.
rocket scientist in Haifa. Many of you, if you're just joining us for the first time, Ari Sasher works part-time for Raphael and part-time for our organization, U.S. Israel Education Association. He's the former chief engineer of Iron Dome. He's one of those, really smart rocket scientists. But beyond that, a real strategist. And we wanted to ask you, Ari, going into this fourth week of the war, tell us your thoughts just on Israel's missile defense systems, what we need to know going into this week.
Well, I don't have a whole heck of a lot to say above and beyond what Michael said. What I can say is that 10 miles north of my house is 150,000 rockets that were built by the Hezbollah, which is an Iranian proxy. The Iranians were kind enough to ship in precision guidance units so that some of these things are not like the Hamas that they go up, they go down, and you yell Allah Akbar, and wherever it lands, you're happy. But some of these have the capability to hit very sensitive locations. The going assumption is that on day one of a war, we'll start taking anywhere between 5,000 and 6,000 rockets in the north of the country a day. We've taken from Hamas about 8,000 over the last 3.5 weeks. You can imagine 6,000 missiles a day. Some of these will be aimed at our gas rigs in the sea, at our power plants, at our water desalination plants, such that on day one of the war, we will lose power, we will lose cell phone coverage, we will lose drinking water, which is why people are storing large amounts of drinking water, because we do not want to see a recurrence of what happened on the southern border in October the 7th. Country was kind enough to uproot 30,000 people who live within 2 kilometers. 2 kilometers, about a mile and a bit from the border. The entire city of Kiryat Shmona, nearly 30,000 people have moved to hotels in the south of the country. This is untenable. The only reason that we have this problem is because until June of 2000, we had a buffer in Lebanon. And we had soldiers up there, and soldiers would do reserve duty up there, and it wasn't fun. And Israel decided we don't want to live in the jungle anymore. We want to live in Denmark. And so we moved to Denmark. We said all of our enemies are not Lebanese and Hezbollah and Hamas. All of our enemies are now Scandinavians. Some of them are Finns. Some of them are Swedes. And we painted our enemy in our own image. And what we've realized in our southern border is that we can't do that. Our enemy is who our enemy is. There's nothing I can give my enemy that will make him happy. But if I were to say to the Iranians or Hezbollah or Hamas, what do you want? And I will give it to you. Only thing he would ask for is my life, because that's all that they want. And so to address the threat of rocket fire on the north of the country, but truth be told, I mean, while Hamas is playing around with weapons that can hit from Gaza, they can hit all the way up to Haifa or near Eilat, and then they root rah team if it hits anywhere near where they're headed. Hezbollah can hit the entire country with precision guided weapons. And to defend against it, we have our multi-tier missile defense system. The lowest tier is Iron Dome, and that's been doing a yeoman's share of the work. Everything in Raphael now revolves around building Iron Dome interceptors, getting them out of the factory as fast as possibly can. As an aside, about 75% of each interceptor is built in the U.S. So we're scampering to build more. The people all over the U.S., our subcontractors are also working equally hard to get those pieces, components to us so we can build it. We have David Sling. David Sling has gotten a lot of use. David Sling is a layer above Iron Dome. David Sling will take out rockets that are going from Gaza to Tel Aviv, Gaza to Jerusalem. And David Sling has been taking out a whole bunch of missiles this round. It's been doing about the same kind of performance as Iron Dome, greater than 90%. That said, if you hit 90% of the bad guys, there's another 5 to 10% that are falling on the ground. And if you're in Israel and you hear an alarm go off, my message to you is you get into a sealed room. We have a 3-pronged system to save Israelis from rocket fire. Prong number 1 is alert. We have an amazing capability to predict where the bad boy is going to fall. We sound an alarm, and then the second prong is you get yourself inside, get yourself away from windows. If you're outside and you're in your car, get out of the car, get on the floor, cover your hands, because cover your head with your hands, because our lovely neighbors have this capability of taking the rockets that they fire at us and encasing their warhead in nails and ball bearings that explode upwards. If you're lying down, then the chances of you getting hit are less. We have Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 that are above David Sling. They haven't gotten any work, but they will if the Syrians ever get in the act and if the Iranians get in. Last week, another Iranian proxy, our friends, the Houthis in Yemen. I didn't even know they existed. I didn't even know what they had. They fired a whole bunch of cruise missiles and drones at us that just happened to be taken out by the USS John Carney, who was floating around the Red Sea for this kind of instance. They were taken out. Some of them were taken out by Saudi air defense. Some were taken out. They weren't taken out by the Egyptians, but some of them fell in Egypt on a bunch of scuba divers near Nueva. That really put a crimp in their scuba diving. Had the intruders continued unimpeded, they would have been intercepted by an IDF Patriot missile battery, which is sitting there north of Eilat. What can the U.S. do? What is the U.S. doing? First and foremost, here's what Israel does not want the U.S. to do. Israel does not want one single U.S. soldier to die defending Israel. We do need a number of things. We need precision-guided munitions like JDAM and SDB. These are being used. These are precision-guided munitions which take up to 2,000 pounds of TNT and drop it exactly where we want it to go. And they hit exactly where we want it to go. We do not fire indiscriminately. We identify targets, we prosecute targets, and we take out those targets. These are SDB and JDAM are being launched off of our F-15s, F-16s, and F-35s. The U.S. has already ramped up deliveries of JDAMs and SDBs to help us continue prosecuting in Gaza. We need more Iron Dome interceptors. As I said, parts are manufactured in the U.S. The U.S. was kind enough to return 2 unused Iron Dome batteries back to the state of Israel. We're putting them to use. If there's anyone out there in the studio audience today that happens to have an Iron Dome battery that you don't need, please send it to us. We need low-tech weapons. Heather, okay, fine, just after we finish. Low-tech weapons like artillery shells, rifles, jeeps. There are pictures of these coming off U.S. airplanes that are landing in Israel. We could really use your missile defense, not because we need it, but because it makes a huge statement. If you position Aegis ships in the Mediterranean Sea that can shoot down Iranian or even Lebanese and Syrian weapons with their SM-6s. If you position a THAAD battery in Israel, like the U.S. is positioning THAAD batteries in Saudi and in the UAE, it's a huge statement that the U.S. and Israel are going hand in hand. The fact that the carrier group is out there, the fact that the carrier group, I have my little Flight 24 radar app. It just shows all the planes that are buzzing around. There's one plane over the last couple of days. It takes off somewhere in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. It flies over Gaza, and it just does circles. My guess is that it's taking pictures and sending intel to Israel. We need intel. I don't even want to talk about that here, what kind of intel we need. We need your support. President Biden's support has been unequivocal and unambiguous, and I cannot thank the U.S. enough. That said, global support for Israel typically has a very short shelf life. As we can see from rallies and demonstrations going on around the world, our support is quickly waning, and it'll wane further when Gaza's humanitarian crisis unfolds. And that is when we need your support the most. Mm-hmm. We have already seen images of large violent rallies around the world, including in the U.S., especially in universities, places like Harvard, Princeton, Cooper Union. The U.S. must stand tall with Israel until we have successfully uprooted Hamas terrorists that have taken over Gaza. If our job, our mission is halted before it is completed, then we will not only not have won, we will have lost. It's binary, my friends. We either win this one or we lose this one. There is no extra innings. Terrorists will have learned that a little resolve and a lot of disinformation can put lipstick on the most heinous and abominable acts of terror. Now, more than ever, 3 weeks down the line, we need your support. And I know that we can count on it. Am Yisrael Chai, the nation, the people of Israel live. And whether you like it or not, we're sticking this one out. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Ari. So appreciate that. Really appreciate that. And all of you for being on this briefing today. Thank you for joining us. There is no other time that Israel has been at war in our generation like this one. And so as we go about our day, as you're in your business and you're at home or whatever your life is like, it's important for you to be following and tracking this war. Assume your position as a watchman on the wall, be knowledgeable, be in prayer. We need to be able to stand with our government at this point that is standing with Israel. That means to take time every day to pray that our leaders will continue in that stead of moral clarity and understanding, as well as be able to continue to back Israel all the way to the end. As you heard from Ambassador Oren, there is not going to, and there cannot be a ceasefire. So until Israel has rooted out and taken down Hamas and has replaced that entity with somebody that can lead the Palestinian people in Gaza. So let's understand our assignment as Americans. We are the citizens, and we have a role to play in this war. So it is a time not to be silent, to be vocal, get to your congressman and let them know how important this is to you, and that we need unequivocal support all the way to the end. I want to just say that U.S. Israel Education Association is playing a dynamic role on Capitol Hill. We just got off of a briefing with a group of members and had one of the experts on the northern border of Israel, intelligence and captain, who really helped instruct the members on what's taking place with the proxies of Iran and the role that that Israel is playing alongside the United States to deter this really full-scale war theater on the Northern Command. It is a time to understand and be able to support Congress so that they can do their job with the Biden administration and work cohesively together, bipartisan support. You have to choose a side. Bottom line, you have to choose a side. It can't be ambivalent. It can't be in between. It can't be convenient, and it can't be expedient. It's got to be clear and unambiguous. We are dealing with the real threat of Western civilization, and it is a sum total of terrorist proxies and radical entities. And we've got to be able to see it. We've gotten wind of it. Our eyes have seen the horror of it, and we need to continue to stand firm. Thank you for your support for U.S. Israel Education Association. You can go to our website, also JH Israel. We have a command center in the middle of Israel, inside the West Bank, where the IDF soldiers are training, the Mossad, the special and elite forces of the military. And it is an extremely important location. And we actually support that entirely. JH Israel supports that. Only JH Israel supports that financially. So we appreciate your gifts, your donations at this time. We are integral and relevant inside the season that Israel is in. And we thank you for joining us. We'll keep you informed with more briefings. Stay tuned. Have a great day.